I was saying, whenever a people have conquered another, but are dominated by the language of those they have conquered, they usually have a problem of dealing with scale. You have to genuinely dominate them in order to be able to rule them. And where that is the case, you can never escape the question of over-hegemony. They are not just rulers in the normal sense of a people who supply leaders to another. They also have to be leaders in the sense of providing a cultural, and in this particular case, a religious tonality for whatever happens between them. You find that the Fulani have had to demonstrate it, that they are different from those whom they have conquered. Lord Lugard, the British adventurer who came and conquered so much of what is now northern Nigeria, the first thing he noticed was that those who were governing were not of the same racial or ethnic stock as those they governed. And he set out on his own to do what was already happening in Uganda, where a ruling class, a ruling nationality ensured their dominance of a vast majority, so that the British had to form, so to say, a coalition with the rulers against those they ruled. The way Lugard pictured it, they needed to form that alliance with the rulers, and in his own view, he wished that he would teach the rulers how to govern the masses. If they did not know how to do it with the first generation, they would teach their children. If their children did not know how to do it, they would teach their children's children. So that for the British conqueror, it was a very formalized process of taking leadership from one generation to another, on the presumption that followership would also be from one generation to another. When Nigeria then became bigger, and the population of the north, of the Hausa-speaking north, now covered more than Hausa, Fulani, and others, it became for them a necessity to create a Nigeria almost in the image of the same division between the conquered and the conquerors. The conquerors were determined to spread their tentacles wide, and they were determined to make sure that no matter how wide the ambit of that spread, they would always follow the suzerainty, the formalized leadership already provided by the jihad. It is important to tell the story from as far back as this because all the other ethnic groups in Nigeria were formed in virtually the same way, which is to say, one group related to another either by conquest or by trade, and sought to dominate them while the British were seeking to dominate all the ethnic groups put together. If you go as far back as I have gone in the case of the Fulani, the Igbo and the Yoruba were of the same ethnic stock. In fact, you have this picture of one nationality, you have the Yoruba and the Igbo as one nationality, which divided after centuries of commonality. That is to say, the Yoruba house was divided, and the virtual civil war between the Igbo, to those who became Igbo, and no, let me put it that way. The most important thing was that they were one people, but that they then divided, and the group that was left behind, so to say, the group that was left behind and beaten into exile were called Igbo, and those that remained at home became Yoruba. This is why you keep having these inconclusive arguments. Some people will say Yoruba, the Yoruba did not, the Yoruba were named by other nationalities. No, it was after the Igbo and the Yoruba split that the need for both sides to rename themselves arose. For instance, Ife was the center of their civilization, and Ife was actually called Igbomokum, according to Yoruba historians. And among the best historians Africa has produced in terms of dredging our past are those Yoruba historians who looked very hard at, who looked history in the eye and have not flinched from letting us know the origins of the various groups. The Yoruba and Igbo languages were of a common root in a common environment. It's like a language in the same house, which broke as various migrations came into the picture and interacted. The languages started changing. The Igbos were on the western side of the Niger. They were not of the eastern side. They interacted with several other Nigerian nationalities. The Yoruba, that is the Yoruba before Oyo, who spoke an older language than the one that Oyo speaks today, that the Yoruba speak today. Now, they interacted with the Igala, who in several migrations, interacting with the Igbo and so many other groups, created movements that moved as far as East Africa, so that if you go to East Africa today, the Igbo speak a kind of language that the Igala speak. And when you think of all their movements in terms of how they moved from Nigeria, you would need also to remember that the various movements inside Nigeria came from migrations related to the Kanuri, the Jonkun. In fact, in the case of the Jonkun, their warrior ethic carried them from further down south and east into north up till Kano and Kaduna. And it made the whole of that area an area of constant struggle for control. The Kanuris were moving in from the east, but with the dominance of various nationalities, and there were, and up to today, we can count up to about 136 different nationalities in various parts of northern Nigeria. As they dominated the groups also moved and dominated others, so that there was a constant relationship between various nationalities within the same place. You can hear of the Efik today talking about coming from the Middle East, Yemen, and places like that. The Hausa will tell you they came from Iraq. The myths of origins of the Yoruba begin from the Middle East. But the truth is that all of them were formed by the maelstrom of that Middle Niger around the Niger Benue. If the Fulani were coming from Futajalon and moving in different directions, they were simply acquiring different aspects of the various groups they interacted with, which is why a maker of dictionary in Yoruba, Igbo, if you draw up the number of words that are shared by all the various ethnic groups, it is amazing to find that many of the Nigerian language groups actually speak languages that have common words across all of them. Now, if you move from what we now call northern Nigeria down to the south, you are going to find that those migrations left remnants behind that give you a picture of Nigeria as genuinely a scramble for space. Not all of them had space. They had to create it. The Fulani may have moved from northern Africa into Futatoro or Futajalon, but the movements that they made from one conurbation to another remain active in a very direct sense. First, because trade between various parts of West Africa before the Europeans came did not exclude any part. Africans traded between themselves immensely. And although it came to the point where every nationality literally drew a round around themselves to prefigure the nations they will become, you can say that those that were nationality oriented managed to be also land oriented. Not all of them were like the Fulani, who did not become land centered in their migrations. You could say that many of them knew the source of their origin. Like all other West African nations and language groups, they can also trace their sources, their origins to the Middle East, where virtually all of them, because you see, all of them, human beings moved from Africa into the Middle East, and from the Middle East they moved back again to Africa. Once you understand that business of the movement, you understand that point made by the Senegalese authority, Anta Diop, who talked about black people having occupied Israel before a less civilized white race moved into the area. Now, they moved into the area and intermixed with black people. You can almost understand the relationship between all the people in the Middle East by understanding how that intermixture with the blacks of Egypt and the surrounds created the basis for the interaction not only of language but of cultures. Now, Nigeria was like a major beneficiary of that interaction. If there were movements from Somalia southwest into West Africa, or movements from Libya into what is now Hausa land, these were like feeding into the different nationalities that occupied what we will now call Nigeria. Some of them, as migration settled, built cities. And a city is always made not necessarily by people of a common language, but by people who, for various reasons, economic and otherwise, stay together. The relationship between the movements from the Middle East down to the forest zone beyond the desert constitute one of the most untalked about aspects of our history, in the sense that very many of those who came from Iraq or Iran were part of a Middle East influx and reflux, which, if you investigate closely, you will find that some people who claim to be Nigerians may actually be more related to those other people than we know. The movements from Yoruba land into what is now called Dahomey, or Togo, Ghana, they are all part of movements that, if we study closely, all the West Africans have a good reason to insist that they must have a common nationality. If I have talked about the Igbo and the Yoruba splitting and interacting with well, we will now call them the Middle Belt, you will find that the never formed a nationality until later. That is to say, the people who lived in places that were always suffering erosions, they gave themselves one name. Those who were artisans and doing such things gave themselves a special name, so that many Igbo groups were named according to the environments they moved to. They did not all call themselves Igbo, but because the movement from northern Igbo land, which is to say in relation to the Igala and those, because that relationship created a strong population that was Igbo speaking, they spread across to various other parts of Igbo land due mainly to slavery. And that ensured nobody, irrespective of where he or she came from, could escape these movements. If the Igala moved down to shall we say to Aba, and they took with them their language, they will be spreading the same language, so that no proper nationality existed in Nigeria that did not interact with all the other groups. The languages they spoke had ways, therefore, of relating to one another. But once time allowed them to settle, they all started making distinctions between themselves that allowed for a new range of siblinghood. There is a novel by, no, let me take literature out of it before I confuse people. Now, the fact is that the Yoruba spoken in Eastern Yoruba land today has always been different from the language that is spoken in Western Yoruba land. I mean, the easiest way to talk about it is to talk about the Okun Yoruba and the non-Okun Yoruba. The thing is, the creation of nations always allows for that kind of abridgment of nationality. The Igbo who moved from the west of the Niger eastwards, in their interactions, did not necessarily abandon their Igbo-ness. They simply took it along with them. But in Yoruba land, they had to interact in a different kind of way. And I must say that the reason theirs must be regarded as a different kind of way is that they had to interact with the Edo and the Ijaw. That interaction changed not only language. That interaction changed not only language, it changed religion, and it changed very many other factors, artworks, and the myths. For instance, the myth of the founder of Yoruba land is a myth. I argue from my own personal research and arguments with the historians that Yoruba history began properly with the interaction between them and and those we now call Edo, they were not always called Edo. They were called Igodo, Migodo. And the prince who moved from Igodo to Ife happened to be somebody who was used to kingship of a very peculiar kind. And he reorganized those he met in Ife. He reorganized them and did what in modern times we would call a coup, and began to rule the area. The people he organized were those, you remember I said, were together as Igbo. It was the entrance of the Benin prince that changed the relationship. It changed the chemistry of the whole environment.